Have you ever felt like something small could change everything? Sometimes all it takes is a glance, a step out of the ordinary, or an unexpected encounter to completely redefine the course of our lives. And that's exactly what happened to a discreet millionaire who, upon leaving a meeting, saw a little girl sleeping in the snow. On that freezing night, he could have simply walked right past, but he didn't. This story isn't just about money, nor about charity. It's about the power of human connections, about choices that seem simple but carry the power to transform destinies. It's about second chances, about unexpected kindness, about a CEO who discovered that numbers don't warm the soul, but compassion does. It's a journey that begins with silence and ends with purpose. And if you think you've seen anything like it before, get ready. What this man did the next day will surprise you, because some encounters don't happen by chance. And there are gestures that even discreet ones have the power to change not just one life, but several. This is one of those stories that touches you deeply. And perhaps, after hearing it, you'll decide to stop for someone else too, even if just for a moment. Victor Zielinski wasn't your typical CEO. Although a millionaire and owner of a chain of sustainable hotels across Europe, he lived quietly in Warsaw. That night, after leaving a stressful meeting, he decided to walk to the parking lot instead of using his driver, a random choice, but one that would change his life. It was there, near a nearly deserted tram station, that his eyes fell upon a small figure huddled next to an abandoned phone booth. The girl, who would later learn her name was Lena, appeared to be 5 years old. She wore an adult sweatshirt made into a makeshift coat, and her feet were shod in plastic sandals even as the snow covered the ground. She wasn't crying, just stared at the ground, hugging a stuffed rabbit. There was something deeply painful in that silence. A childhood forgotten amid the frozen concrete of the city, and Victor, accustomed to signing billion-dollar contracts, felt small before that scene. Instead of moving on, Victor crouched down and asked carefully, "Are you waiting for someone?" The girl simply shook her head. The answer didn't matter as much as the gesture. In that moment, the compassionate millionaire forgot about reports and meetings. He was there as a human being, touched by a connection he never imagined he would feel. That transformative encounter would plant the seed of something greater, a life-changing event for him and Lena. As Victor took off his coat to wrap Lena in it, he asked if she knew where her mother was. Her eyes narrowed from the cold. She replied weakly, "Mom went to get soup, but it was a long time ago." Despite her unsettling answer, there was something sweet in her voice, as if she still believed everything would turn out okay. And it was this innocent faith that unsettled Victor. The words that disarmed him came next, when Lena whispered, "I think you're a gift from heaven." Mom always says miracles come when we need them most. Those words, simple and pure, struck Victor's heart like an arrow. He, who had spent his life distrusting others' intentions, found himself faced with a child who saw him as a blessing. The contrast was stark, the skepticism of a hardened businessman faced with the unwavering faith of an abandoned girl. There, Victor began to experience something new. It wasn't just pity, it was a rare kind of connection, as if that unexpected gesture of stopping in the cold had meaning. For the first time, he began to question himself. How much of his life had been guided by goals, and how much by purpose? That girl, so fragile yet so determined, was teaching him something business books had never shown, that hope and true love can still emerge even in the darkest winters. Victor decided to sit with Lena on the cold station steps, wrapping his coat around her. With each passing minute, the external cold seemed less bothersome than the internal unease growing within him. It was as if the girl's silence filled something he hadn't even realized was empty. For the first time in years, he simply wanted to be present. No cell phone, no spreadsheets, no rush. As he watched the snowflakes accumulating on Lena's hood, Victor realized something strange. He was listening. The sound of the distant city, the girl's breathing, the crunch of snow beneath his own shoes. It was as if his mind, once racing, had been forcibly slowed down. The human connection there wasn't based on words, but on something more instinctive. He didn't want to leave. And in that moment, simple yet moving, Victor saw more than a vulnerable child. He saw a chance to change, to do something different with the fortune he'd accumulated. That seemingly chance encounter was challenging every belief he'd cultivated about success. For the first time, he thought, what if the real investment isn't financial, but emotional? The ice around his heart began to melt, and it frightened him, but it also freed him. After a few minutes of silence, Victor asked if there was anyone he could call. Lena simply replied, "My mom will be back, but she's taking a while today." With no sign of his mother, Victor made a quick but careful decision. He discreetly called a trusted acquaintance and asked for help finding a safe place, discreet and warm. He didn't want to appear heroic, just someone who could and wanted to help. He explained to the receptionist at the small charitable motel on the other side of town that he would be arriving with a child and a woman who might be suspicious, and firmly asked, "Don't mention my name." And then he covered Lena more tightly with a blanket from the car and placed her in the back seat with all the care he hadn't known he possessed. The girl trusted him without hesitation. It was as if in Victor's eyes she had seen something Victor couldn't see in himself. When they finally found Kasia, the mother, in a nearby alley, exhausted and trembling, Victor asked no questions. He simply said, "If you want, I have a warm place for the night." Kasia instinctively hesitated, but seeing the way he held her daughter, the way she nestled peacefully in his lap, her fear was replaced by quiet relief. In that brief encounter, something extraordinary was born. Not a debt, but a new chance, offered without demands, without judgment. The walk to the motel was shrouded in an almost sacred silence. Victor, normally so talkative in meetings, now simply watched. Kasia carried Lena in her arms with a mixture of relief and caution, while Victor walked alongside, offering his presence as shelter. The cold seemed less cruel on this journey, as if empathy had the power to warm the air between them. Lena, already half asleep on her mother's shoulder, murmured with a small smile, "I like him, Mommy. He makes the air feel warm." This undid Kasia. In that innocent sentence, there was something rare, a spontaneous trust, as if this man, until then a stranger, was part of her story. Kasia shot a silent glance at Victor, who simply nodded as if to say, "You don't need to thank me." Upon arrival, Victor insisted that the accommodation be booked without his name. He didn't want the spotlight nor any records, just to ensure a night of safety. For him, the gesture wasn't charity, it was reparation. Something inside him told him that helping those three hearts, Lena, Kasia, and his own, was more important than any corporate metric. In the simplicity of that night, an invisible bond began to form, stitched together by empathy and silence. The next morning, Victor returned to his daily routine, or tried to. The image of Lena sleeping, Kasia's wary, exhausted gaze, and the strangely warm atmosphere of that night followed him like a shadow. Before heading to the office, he left an envelope at the motel reception with a simple note: "If you need another night, it's paid." No phone number, signature, or logo, just the intention to continue helping without intruding. Later, he received an anonymous email. "Thanks for seeing us. Lena is waiting for you to tell more stories." Victor read those words over and over. There was no irony, no pressure, no demands, only sincerity. Those few lines shook him more than any shareholder speech. For the first time, he realized he had never done anything driven by pure emotion. There had always been goals, returns, targets. But here, there was only one truth that struck a chord. As he sipped his cold coffee, staring out the window of his penthouse, he felt something inside him need to change. The human connection that was beginning to form with that small family wasn't planned, but it was real. And that, for someone like Victor, was worth more than any signed contract. He decided right then and there that he didn't want to just help from afar. He wanted to hear more stories. He wanted to be present, and maybe, just maybe, he had something to tell too. Back in his corporate routine, Victor found himself distracted. The spreadsheet seemed irrelevant in the eyes of Lena and Kassia's quiet strength. Driven by a restlessness he couldn't name, he asked a trusted employee to look up public information about her. Not out of distrust, but out of empathy. He wanted to understand what had led her to this point, with a daughter in her arms and her dignity intact. The data came with old photos of community social events. Kassia had volunteered at a neighborhood library, tutored students, and coordinated a literacy project for homeless women. No scandals, no addictions, just profound silences, records of a gradual disappearance from public life after an unexpected pregnancy and the abandonment of Lena's father. She was pure her whole life, Victor thought, and yet the world pushed her to the margins. As he read every detail, Victor felt a mixture of shame and respect. Shame for having so often ignored stories like hers, and respect for her never asking for applause. Kassia was the kind of person who wouldn't raise her hand for help, but she also wouldn't bow her head in the face of pain. This taught him more than any MBA could. For the first time, Victor understood. This wasn't just a struggling mother, but someone with a past of struggle and a present full of dignity. Driven by everything he discovered, Victor decided to do more than just donate money. He approached Kassia personally, this time with less formality and more humility. He offered to help her resume her literacy project, and together they began distributing meals to vulnerable families in forgotten neighborhoods of Warsaw. It was the beginning of something bigger, a social project with a soul built on empathy and action. Their partnership wasn't limited to external actions. Victor listened, truly, when Kassia spoke about inequality, abandonment, and the strength of the city's invisible mothers. She, in turn, gently challenged him, pointing out when he slipped into the old habit of solving everything with money. Their coexistence shaped them mutually. Kassia taught him to look at the invisible, Victor to dream of real support structures. They were different, but their intentions complemented each other. On the streets, as they delivered gloves, blankets, and hot meals, Victor began to feel alive in a new way. He was no longer a CEO on a mission to make an impact. He was a man learning to serve with his heart, and every smile they received was more valuable than any goal achieved. At the end of a freezing afternoon, Kassia looked at him and said, "You needed gloves and a little humility." He smiled and agreed. At the end of another day of delivering groceries, Kassia stepped away for a few minutes, sat on a step, and observed the people who had received help. Her eyes filled with tears, but it wasn't sadness. It was a silent recognition. She knew what it was like to be there, invisible to the eyes of the world. And because of that, she felt she could see in others what no one else could, humanity, even in poverty. Victor approached silently, carrying 2 cups of tea. He sat down beside her and said nothing for a while. Then he murmured, "I want them to know I see them, that they're still human." The sentence came out softly, almost like a confession. Kassia smiled sideways and replied, "You're starting to understand." He was surprised to find himself speaking to her as he would a family member, without barriers, without masks. It was as if he were reconnecting with something he'd lost long ago. Looking at Kassia, Victor saw traits in her he hadn't known he was looking for. There was a gentle strength in her, a presence that reminded him of his own mother, a strong, generous woman who passed away too soon. It was as if, with Kassia, he rediscovered a piece of himself. Not the businessman nor the philanthropist, but the boy who once believed the world could be good, and maybe, just maybe, it still could be. Days turned into weeks, and the project grew. Victor began buying abandoned properties to create warm shelters, support centers, and community libraries. All in the name of the foundation Kassia helped lead, but without mentioning its origins. He insisted, "Leave the foundation's name on everything. Mine doesn't need to appear." For him, it was more than anonymity. It was respect. Cassia still didn't know who the real funder was. But the secrecy began to unravel when Cassia overheard a conversation among excited volunteers. "Did you know it's Zielinski behind all this? Real Viktor Zielinski, the one from the hotels." She froze. The name she heard echoed memories she'd tried to forget. Companies that destroyed old neighborhoods, luxury buildings where community life once existed. She couldn't believe that the simple, kind man she'd met was the very symbol of the power she'd so criticized. At their next meeting, she didn't smile. Her words were harsh. "Why did you lie to me?" Viktor tried to explain, saying it wasn't about hiding, but about doing good without seeming charitable. But the damage was done. Kassia's confusion wasn't just about money or status. It was about trust. She felt betrayed, as if she were part of a project rather than a relationship. The tension grew, and for the first time in weeks, the silence between them wasn't comforting. It was broken. Kassia couldn't hold back the tears as she confronted Viktor. Her voice was firm, but her eyes trembled. "I felt like I was part of a project, as if my pain served as a showcase for your kindness. It was more than hurt. It was the wound of someone who had fought to be taken seriously her entire life. And now, once again, she found herself reduced to a noble cause in the hands of someone powerful." Viktor tried to interrupt, but she held up her hand. "Listen to me, just today." Viktor didn't try to justify himself, not this time. He simply said with raw sincerity, "You were never a project, never." And then he said what he'd been holding back for weeks, that their connection was real, that he hadn't expected to fall in love with Lena, with Kassia's strength, with that sense of belonging. "You're not part of a philanthropic plan. You're the turning point in my life." But even in the face of so much emotion, Kassia needed distance, and she left. Watching her leave, Viktor felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. That silence that had once healed him now consumed him. He realized that, without realizing it, he had placed in her the last of his hope in humanity and in himself. He stood in the center of the room, alone, like a vast castle with no one in the hallways. It was the pain of true love that arrives late, and of unexpected kindness that was never understood in time. With Kassia's departure, Viktor fell into a profound silence. Nothing made sense anymore. The meetings resumed, the reports arrived, but everything seemed like noise. The sound of the city, once familiar, now only highlighted the void left by that woman and her daughter. Their presence had given color to what had previously been corporate grayness, and now everything seemed faded. In the following days, Viktor began visiting the social centers he helped create alone. He walked among the people, but didn't interact as he used to. He missed Kassia's steady gaze, Lena's light laughter, the sense of belonging. He discovered there that what hurt most wasn't their absence, but the absence of himself, the version he discovered alongside them, the one who learned to care without expecting anything in return. It was during one of these visits that a woman said to him, "You seem lost, son, but your heart still knows the way." And those words, as simple as they were true, touched him. Viktor understood that his search was no longer for validation or forgiveness. It was for reconnection with what had awakened in him and with the people who gave meaning to his coldest winter. It was time to find himself again and start over. A year passed. Winter gave way to spring, and with it, quiet changes blossomed in various corners of Warsaw. In a revitalized old warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a new community throbbed. Women cooking, children running, young people studying. At the center of it all was Kassia, now director and chef of the community project she had helped found with Viktor, but he hadn't returned yet, until that day. Viktor arrived unannounced. He wore simple clothing, no tie, no bodyguards, just a bouquet of flowers and a children's book in his hands. He found Lena organizing colored pencils, and upon seeing him, she cried out, "Mommy, he's back!" Kassia appeared, serious but without resentment. There was peace in her eyes, and perhaps a hint of longing. No words were spoken for the first few seconds. Just a long look full of history and promises yet to be made. They sat on the garden bench. Victor explained that he had spent the year visiting shelters, learning from those who had little and rediscovering his own humanity. "If you let me stay, now I want to build with you. No title, no name stamped on it, just presence." Cassia smiled. And in that moment, amidst flowers and crayons, a new family was born. Not by blood ties, but by choices made with the heart. It was a fresh start with purpose. It was home, finally. Hope sometimes hides between the lines of pain. No one teaches you to wait courageously. It's something you learn when life pushes you against the cold. It was in Lena's gaze, Cassia's silent resilience, and Victor's unexpected decision that hope was reborn. And it came not with fanfare, but with small gestures. A coat offered, a cup of tea shared, an outstretched hand. It wasn't easy. There were grey days, choked words, and silent new beginnings. But true hope is fueled by precisely this, by what seems to lead nowhere, yet insists on growing. It's what transforms a cold night into shelter, a stranger into family, pain into a starting point. It was this flame that kept Cassia going, even without guarantees. And that later rekindled something forgotten in Victor, the desire to truly belong. When all seemed lost, hope became a foundation, not just for them, but for everyone around them. The new community became living proof that winter doesn't last forever, and that unexpected kindness can blossom from the hardest concrete. And perhaps that's hope's greatest strength. It doesn't just transform stories, it transforms those who tell them, those who listen, and those who decide to keep believing. Not every new beginning begins with a plan. Sometimes it's born from a stumble, a mistake, or even a simple gesture, like stopping beside a child in the snow. Victor never imagined that night would redefine his life, but it was there that the old script broke. He discovered that starting over isn't weakness, it's courage. And more than that, it's the freedom to do things differently, even after so long stuck in the same role. Cassia also experienced a new beginning. It wasn't easy to trust again, nor to make room for someone who came from a world so distant from her own. But she learned that starting over doesn't require forgetting the past. It requires giving it new meaning. Her pain became a bridge, her story the foundation for many others, and her silent strength showed that true love is also built with scars. Their second chance wasn't a fairy tale. It was a journey full of doubts, difficult decisions, and reconciliations built over time. But it was real, and therefore transformative, because when two people decide to start over, even when hurt, even when afraid, something powerful happens. They prove that love can be learned, that the moving act of turning back is as valuable as moving forward, and that starting over, when done with purpose, changes everything. Little by little, Cassia's project ceased to be just a shelter. It became a collective home for homeless mothers, forgotten children, and isolated elderly people. Previously invisible people began to see each other in the eye. Victor, now a regular volunteer, was no longer the solidarity millionaire. He was just one of many who decided to believe that good still exists, even when everything seems to be falling apart. There was simplicity in everyday life, pots bubbling, laughter in the courtyard, exchanges of donated clothing. But there was also transformation. The community flourished because everyone participated, each with what they could: time, listening, kindness. This wasn't charity. It was human connection in its purest form. It was the understanding that human relationships heal more than medicine, and that empathy and compassion are the foundation of any true rebuilding. That solidarity village spread like a living idea. It inspired other neighborhoods, gained volunteers, and received anonymous support. And the most beautiful thing was that no one there wanted recognition. What united everyone was the common purpose of believing, even in difficult times. It's worth remembering that, despite the wounds, it's still worth joining hearts that believe in healing, listening, and transformative love. There, goodness stopped being talk and became daily practice. Stories aren't just words strung together. They're invisible bridges between hearts. It was through Lena's story that Victor changed. It was through Kasia's story that so many others found strength. And it's by telling this story that even more lives can be touched. Because a good story doesn't just transform those who experience it, it also transforms those who listen to it with an open heart. Often, it's by listening to someone else's pain that we recognize our own. A simple story can make us cry inside or smile at something we'd forgotten. Kasia learned this from reading letters from women who'd been through shelters. Victor saw it in the eyes of a child who received his first book. Stories connect, heal, and above all, inspire. They remind us that despite everything, it's worth carrying on. And perhaps, in the end, that's what moves us, the chance to live a story worth telling. One that involves true love, emotional overcoming, purposeful new beginnings, and transformative encounters. One that speaks of childhood and innocence, but also of courage and maturity. Because when we tell moving stories, we don't just spread words, we spread hope. And hope, it changes everything. What about you? Have you ever stopped to think about how many stories are happening around you right now? At the bus stop, on the sidewalk, in the silence of those who don't know how to ask for help. Sometimes a small gesture can be the turning point in someone's life. And other times, it can be that very gesture that transforms us first. This story reminds us that no one is immune to pain, but also that no one is prevented from helping. You don't have to be a millionaire to make an impact. You just need to be present, see with your heart, and reach out when no one else will. And perhaps the most beautiful thing is this: the chance to start over doesn't come with a manual, but begins with empathy. If this story touched you in any way, share it in the comments. What unexpected gesture changed your life? Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell, because every week you'll find stories here that inspire, move, and remind us of what truly matters. Let's spread this wave of compassion together.